Your access code was not recognized. Please re-enter your access code, followed by the pound sign. To join the conference as the host, press star. Otherwise, press pound. Please enter your host password, followed by the pound sign. Your conference is already in progress. You are joining your conference as the host. For a menu of available commands, press star pound. Please continue to hold. Your conference is now in question and answer mode. To summon each question, press 1, then 0. Each question will be asked in the order it was received.
And I'm sure they are. No, it's all good. Welcome to everybody, and thank you all for joining us today. I am Raj Patel, the chair of the Code Adoption Subcommittee, which is a subcommittee of the Building Standards Commission. So we are here today to discuss how the rulemaking process is administered. The Building Standards Commission has received comments from various sources with suggested ways to improve the ability for the public to follow the rulemaking process. This subcommittee was identified as a way to review these concerns and seek solutions to potentially improve clarity and make the process easier to follow for the regulated public. I am calling this meeting to order. Joining me today on the subcommittee are three of my colleagues, Commissioner Klaus Bruckner, Commissioner Santillan, and Commissioner Winkle. Additionally, the Building Standards Commission staff will be assisting with the administration of this meeting and the presentation of agenda items. So it is officially 1:35 on July 17th, 2019. Pam, would you please call the roll?
Commissioner Patel?
Here.
Commissioner Klaus Buckner?
Here.
Commissioner Santillan?
Here.
Commissioner Winkle?
Here.
Thank you very much. So I'd like to remind the public that's in attendance who wish to comment on a specific agenda item to please complete a request to address the subcommittee form. The form is buff in color and is available at the table located near the meeting room entrance. Please hand the completed form in to any California Building Standards Commission staff person. Thank you. And for those on the phone, a teleconference phone number is provided on the front of the agenda, and instructions are provided on the back page of the agenda. I will now read those instructions. All callers will begin in listen-only mode. If you wish to make a comment on a specific agenda item, please listen and wait for the subcommittee chair to ask for any comments from the public. At this time, please place yourself into the queue by pressing 1 and then 0 on your keypad. The chair will take any comments from participants in attendance first and will then move on to the participants on the telephone. When you press 1 and then 0, you will hear, "You will be notified when the speaker is ready for your question. To withdraw your question, press 1 and then 0. When it is your turn to comment, you will then hear, "Please ask your question after the tone." A tone will sound and the caller is now in talk mode. The chair will continue through the call queue until there are no questions remaining. The committee will proceed to the next agenda item. Please note, refrain from pressing 1 and 0 multiple times. Doing this toggles your position in and out of the call queue. Press 1 and 0 only once, and then wait for your notification to speak. If possible, please call from a landline using the telephone handset only. This enhances the subcommittee's ability to hear your comments clearly. Calling from a speakerphone or a cell phone reduces the quality of the audio and makes it much harder for your comments to be heard clearly. We also have some housekeeping to take care of before we can get started. First, I'd like to have everyone in the room introduce themselves one at a time, starting with the state agency representatives and then moving on to stakeholders. If you would please state the agency or industry you represent, and then after that, we'll go to the people that are on the phone. And maybe we can start on the slide, yeah.
Greg Anderson, CAL FIRE, Office of the State Fire Marshal.
Crystal Sujeski, CAL FIRE, Office of the State Fire Marshal.
Building Standards Commission.
Beth Maynard, Building Standards.
Michael Newman, Building Standards Commission.
I'm Maida with Building Standards.
Fabian with Building Standards Commission.
Mills, Building Standards. Presley, Building Standards Commission.
Kirby Desmond with Plumbing Manufacturers International.
Andrew Kozidar, CBIA.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, I'm sorry.
Nerve.
Thank you, and I apologize, Commissioners. And now if we could go to anybody that's on the phone. Okay, that's fine.
You have 0 questions remaining.
We can give, okay. You want to give them one more time? Or you want to come back to them? What do you think?
You have 0 questions remaining.
Okay. We can move on. So, thank you for everyone for introducing yourselves. So this meeting is being audio recorded and broadcast live on YouTube. We will be posting the documents being discussed live, so those on the phone can follow the conversation. However, as mentioned in the notice, there is a 30-second delay for audio and visuals with YouTube, whereas the teleconference audio is not delayed, so please be patient. We will take a bathroom break at the midpoint of the meeting, and we will have to be finished with this meeting by 4 p.m. so the building staff can shut down for the evening. So I'd appreciate everyone's cooperation with that. And with that, I'd like to turn this meeting over to Building Standards Commission staff to take us through the next agenda item, which will be item 2, presentation of the rulemaking process.
Chair, my name is Gary Fabian. I'm with the California Building Standards Commission, staff architect. And what we'd like
Is the mic
today-
on?
Right up to it. I gotta lean. Okay. Oh my gosh, I can't see my keyboard. Yeah, we'll work the methods out here shortly, folks. Here, Mike Neerman and myself will. Oh, okay, okay, all right. We'll be presenting the items. I'm going to cover item 2A and B as a combined effort and introduce some of the topics here today. One of the things in tackling this sort of effort is to give an overview of the history and process for our current rulemaking in accordance with the building standards law. So I'll give a guide to that. It will also dovetail into our website. Because our website has been recently revamped, that... Really?
Test. Yeah.
Without the headset. Okay, we'll try that. Because the website is such an integral part of our rulemaking process, we'll also take you on a tour of that because it's been recently modified and revamped in order to better serve the stakeholder community. So we'll do a quick tour of that, and we'll also do a refresher course in the process itself. Along the way, we'll point out some of the things that we have observed over the last several years concerning the rulemaking process. And then we'll bring up some of the public input comments that we've received over the last several years too. And then we'll also at between each of the items that Mike and I go through today, we'll ask the chair to assess the temperature out there from the stakeholders and get some comments and questions volleyed to us. So we have plenty of opportunity. Okay, I have a slide deck of 4 slides here today that we'll go through right now as a refresher course in rulemaking for the Building Standards Code. The 4th slide will be the one that we stay on for the most part of this. We'll go about 25 minutes in doing this introductory effort here. We start with the intention of the agency. There are 4 blocks here shown on the screen. The intention is borne out through, it originates because of a need to propose either a modification or a new entry or a repeal to the codes. And there are 3 methods of making that happen. Number 1 being the coordinating council effort, which meets normally once or twice a year, where an agency can make an announcement of some facet, some topic that they wish to explore, or they are planning on making a regulatory effort to because of statutory need or other interests. Another method is letter of intent that comes to our office, where the agency stipulates what their intentions are to do so that we can plan our workload and the workload of all the agencies in making the rulemaking process successful and on time. Workshops are an ancillary part of this. It's kind of an informal thing where ideas are volleyed about by the agency and put the ideas and concepts to the test in the eyes of the stakeholders. The initial submittal. Really? Okay.
Would you like
that
to
right?
sit here? Would you like to sit here? I'll
You know what? Oh, okay. You can, but I can sit opposite too. That
Tell
chair.
me when to switch slides that we're
Okay. Okay, how's that?
Good.
Oh, wow, I can hear myself too. Oh, boy, okay. All right, so that's the first block, intention. And that's kind of an informal step in the whole process. Another rather informal step, although it falls under building standards law, is the initial submittal. And that entails a staff review, and primarily we are not looking for content as much as we're looking for process adherence. In other words, format of the documents, completion of a complete package of documents from the agency, and so forth. The code advisory committees are a key element early on in our process. And that is also something that's not a part of OAL's APA requirement, which a number of other state agencies will go through, but building standards law requires this for proposing agencies in order to dry run, so to speak, their proposed initiatives. The 3rd item and the 4th items are indented for a reason, because building standards law follows protocol for the Administrative Procedure Act, born through the Office of Administrative Law. So I'll try not to say acronyms too many times here. I don't want to lose people. The comment period and the final submittal are really the official portion of the rulemaking process as far as the state of California is concerned. Building standards law starts at the top of these 4 blocks and goes clear to the bottom, though, and encompasses the APA. The comment period is, of course, when the public is invited to participate in order to keep the rulemaking process, number 1, transparent, and number 2, complete and understandable, and truly becomes makes an item become truly a representation of the people of the state of California. The 45-day period that's listed on the first bullet to the right of the comment period is the first, what we call paper hearing. There may be other hearings that happen, comment periods that happen, in addition to the 45-day, but they'll all go through the primary 45-day, followed sometimes by a 15-day and or a second 45-day, and possibly even a third round of paper hearings. There's also the possibility for a physical public hearing in an announced place. So the final submittal then is staff review again, just as in Block 2. Block 4, staff review it again to make sure that the submission is complete and in proper order so that it'll pass muster going through the commission action. So in Blocks 1 through 4, you can see that there's our checkpoints all along the way. It's a dry run, and then it's showtime for the comment period and the public eye, and then the commission takes an action on it in the final. 2 things to point out along the way. In the second block, it says Code Advisory Committee there. This is one area where we, the staff of Building Standards Commission, rebalance constantly the workload for these committees, the CACs we call them. Sometimes the CACs are an ad hoc where we'll combine PME with Green Committee and so forth, or Health Facilities Committee with BFO, which is Building, Fire, and Other, or leave them separate depending on the volume load of what's coming in. This is why Block 1, it's so important to get the intent from all the agencies that contribute to the process. So we try to even load the balance amongst the committee members as well as make it easily accessible and understood by the public and all the stakeholders. The second opportunity for rebalancing is just before commission action, too. We will likewise, you'll see some of the examples that we have today of several commission meetings like we had this last cycle. I believe there were 4 of them grand total. So some of the items will get split and put into various meetings. So this makes it more difficult, obviously, for the average individual to follow the process. So we have a couple of things that we'll point out that help individuals keep track of what's going on within the process in total. Okay, Leanne. Okay, how do you follow code development? What we have found over time is that everybody has their favorite method in order to follow rulemaking. It could be by the agency. You may have a particular interest in a particular agency's activities. It might be by topic, which is pretty common. If I'm interested in CLTs, I may zero in on that word and look for it throughout the rulemaking. By code part is probably used once in a while. In other words, either building code, plumbing code, or green code. And then by instigating law that cause some regulatory action to happen. If there's an interest in bill activity or statutes that have been signed into law, there's that possibility where someone could want to track something that way. And there are probably a host of others that we're not aware of. But our challenge is, how do we become the all-channel access for all persons? Right there. Okay, Liam. A system can only slice the apple a certain way. There are website limitations. The new website that we're going to take a peek at today helps clear up some of those issues. And that's important to state here because we've gotten complaints about following a particular item or group of items, an agency, et cetera, through the process using our website. When the website was revamped this year, we think that clarified a number of the issues that have been brought forward in the last few years. So navigation should be easier now with this. I'll introduce you what's called left margin on each page of our website, which gives us flexibility in what helpful hints and other navigational tools we can post into the website. Pathway, complex path of a proposal. We looked at the first slide and there were 4 blocks there, and it seems like a pretty simple path. But at any point in time, any item can be either pulled by the agency, or there could be an item that simply, in addition to the 45-day comment period, actually does a little side routine and goes through an additional 15 or additional 45, so it gets stalled, and that stalls it going to the commission meeting or something like that. So that adds complexity to that simple path. There is also a variety of format, and we'll get into some samples of that. For instance, item number versus section number out of the codes and so forth. We assign identifiers to each one of the proposed items that come before us in order to make the commissioners and the CAC members' lives simpler and easier to deal with the material that they have. Sheer volume is another item that comes into the complex path here. I don't know what it was like in the old days. Mike would know, but today, I think this last rulemaking, we had 45 packages come through. That's 45 rulemaking files from 8 or 9 agencies. I don't know how many items that amounted to, but it was several hundred, I'm sure. The last item here, a variety of access methods. We just saw in the previous slide, there were, you develop your favorite item to follow, or your favorite agency, or a law that you want to follow through to the finish line. There are so many ways to do it. Our desire is to be all things to all people, but the fact is that these limitations right here that we have, especially the website, keep us from doing that really, really effectively, but we try our best in order to make the information available in a logical sense and pattern. I think one more thing that Mia wanted me to mention is we are actually working on currently a variety of variable access methods. For instance, one of them is a timeline of rulemaking that's, you've seen our timelines for the 18-month rulemaking process, I'm sure. And we're working on having that be full of live links where we just click on a particular point in that timeline and it would take you to current status of things. So, but these are all in development. Next slide. Okay, we'll spend some time here. You can see I have a number of links here. Let's follow a provision through this process. I don't know why I put a question mark after that, but I think it once was a question. But these are 3 of the 4 steps, okay? After the introduction of a particular proposal, it goes through the initial submittal, comment period, and then the final submission for commission action. In the first bubble, and those of you who are watching on YouTube, you may get the first block of text a little bit blocked out here by the picture inset, but the agency submits the package for a given code part. Now, the package that I'm referring to is called a rulemaking file, all right? And you can see in blue highlight there, it says rulemaking file number. That's the first thing we do is assign it a number when it comes in. That rulemaking file represents an agency, and it may represent more than one part, but generally only one part out of Title 24 that it represents. The second bullet, package assignment to CAC group, I'm going to leave for a moment and come back in a moment. Provision assigned is the third bullet. A tracking number is assigned, and that's in addition to the rulemaking file number. We'll show examples of this here just momentarily here. And then the commission action matrix, which is kind of I call it the program guide. It's kind of the shorthand to the universe in rulemaking. And so the ultimately at the end of the initial phase, the CAC recommendations would be reflected in that commission action matrix. Okay, Leanne, if you would click on the rulemaking file up at the top, rulemaking file number, and I hope it works. No, you shouldn't. Oh. Technical difficulties. Please stand by. Sorry. All right, this is an example of our new website. And keep in mind that the new website really hasn't been tested in the eyes of rulemaking yet. It just came on in spring of this year, and we had just finished the last rulemaking cycle. So its true acid test will be in the intervening cycle coming up. This is a screenshot of the a normal rulemaking page, and what I want to show, it's really poor quality, I'm sorry. Circled in red down in the field there in the middle of the slide is some examples of rulemaking file numbers, and I'll read them to you in case there's a BFO banner up at the top in solid blue, and it gives the date for that meeting. Thank you. And the down below that, inside that BFO action or advisory committee routine is a rulemaking file number, and that says BSC 0118. The BSC stands for the agency. The 01 is the first package, rulemaking package received from that agency. This one happens to represent, I believe, part 1 or part 2. So the 01 has nothing to do with the part of the code. The 18 is the cycle number. So each agency is going to have its own unique 0118 or 0218, depending on how many packages it submits and if it submits at all during the 18 cycle, in this particular case. So, okay, Leanne, back out. I forgot to go ahead and click on the next one. Thank you. This is the next page we'll go to, the Triennial Code Adoption Cycle, and you can see circled in red down there is something that says Code Adoption Committee. And so up above were the workshops, pre-cycle it's called, the bullet above on the screen. The second bullet down is the Code Adoption Committee activities. Off to the left is what I referred to earlier as the left margin. This is our opportunity anywhere along the way, and we look for your suggestions as to how to build this side of the website. The right side is basically the menu to get to where we want to go. The left side are other places that we can venture to. And depending on how you navigate this website and what kind of information you're after, that left side can be tweaked in order to fulfill that need. In other words, if I need to get to final rulemaking menu to the initial to check something out, it might be nice to have a link on the left side in order to get back that way. So these are, this one that's circled is the CAC activity right there. And if Leanne, you slide down, can you use the slider to go down the page? Use the roller. There you go. Okay. What I did was I opened up that page, and you'll see it was circled in the last one. And in this link, it's inside the BFO CAC pack, and for that date's meetings. And you can see there's health facilities, there's access, there's BFO is there, and so forth. These are all the CACs that are possible. Well, there's a number of others, but these are the menus for finding your item within a particular, finding an agency's item within a particular topic. And the CACs are generally topic-driven, but the finding an item, once you have it found, you'll want to write down the rulemaking package number as well as the item number on it. Go ahead and slide down further, Leanne. I don't know if that, okay. I opened the BFO, which is on the bottom bullet there on the previous slide, and this is what I get. Here's actually 3 packages. You can see the arrows point to 2 of them, of the Building Standards Commission had 2 packages proposed for that rulemaking. And in light blue, those are links. Probably at this phase, they go to the ET, the express terms, as well as to the eyesore right there. And then up at the top, underneath the item circled here for building, fire, and other, is the notice. And the notice is actually a good document to have on this page because that tells the reader what the topics are to be covered, what agencies will be there represented, as well as which package is going to be heard at those CAC meetings. Okay, Leanne, I think we're out of... Oh, yeah, I wanted to show this too, because one of the comments we received this year in this cycle, and that was based on the old website, interested us because we didn't realize a lot of this was going on out there, the comparison of 2 documents at the same moment. It was limited in our previous website application. Now it's possible, and you can see the center band there of roughly 1/4 of this slide is the website behind it on my screen. Off the left side, I have the initial express terms open, and I was able to open on the right side, the ET, the express terms. So the express terms and the initial statement of reasons can be opened and compared side by side at the same moment now. They open in separate, in independent pages. So you don't have to anymore use the back button in order like you did at on the old website there. You can actually open both these documents at once, which I took from this main master page in there. Okay, Leanne, we can go to the next link. Okay, here's the typical matrix that we use, and you don't see this matrix until the end of the initial phase. That's because there's nothing to put on it. But if, Leanna, would you scroll up just, okay, that's great. Up, there you go, there you go. That's what I meant by up, I'm sorry. I'm upside down. Circled on the left, it says HCD 03 something there, 15.6.3. Out of that number, that's your tracking number. That's used by us, and it's used by the agency possibly, mainly us, to keep track of hundreds of these little items that come through the office during the rulemaking cycle. You can see up top where it says Chapter 4, and it names the chapter, and then there's charging language underneath that. That's very important. It says adopt entire chapter with amendments as follows. And then it'll list those amendments that are going to be modified by the proposed rulemaking activity. The HCD, in this case, identifies the agency. The 03 is package 03, which represent a specific part. In this case, I believe it was part 10. The subsequent numbers there, 18, since it's from the 18 cycle, and then the suffix numbers are interesting because that's an actual tracker for the individual item. And that item is tied inextricably to the code section, which is this next column, 405, I think it's saying, .4.1. And that will live with that identifier throughout its entire life in this process. So if you want to follow something, once you find out this number that's circled in red, you hang on to that number and you can track anything throughout its entire life in the cycle. There's, just to point out something that's ancillary here, in the last cycle, and I'm not sure if it's prevalent in previous cycles, but it seems to be becoming more so, some of the agencies that submit to us, and keep in mind there's upwards of 15 of them out there that can do that, they have either no confidence or limited confidence, or it's a simple administrative housekeeping goal that they have, to where they want to represent on this table and in their express terms the existing items that are being brought forward from the previous code. Now, you'll see the top line up here. It gives an identifier, and then it shows 405.2.1 through 2.2 in red. And what that is, over on the right side in annotations, you see the language, existing language being brought forward. There's no action that can be taken on this item. So this is something that's extraneous to the current rulemaking process. And this is one of the items that we question coming in today as to whether we want to maintain this housekeeping routine or not. It may help the agencies. We're not sure. There's no commission action, or there's no advisory committee action that can be taken on this item. It's simply noted to be brought forward. But it adds paper, it adds confusion. It also gives the public, who might be unknowing, an opportunity to comment on this item if it shows up in their ET, in their express term. So, Leanne, I don't know if there's a scroll down on this. Can you? Okay, that's it. All right, let's go to the next item then. Here's one that has gone through the CAC process, and now we're starting to fill in some of the blocks in here in this living document that we call the matrix adoption table. I'm sorry, the commission action matrix. This document will live with the life of the rulemaking process, and each one of these columns will receive information in it. That's why it's so nice during the rulemaking process, but actually 10 years later, after the rulemaking process, in anyone wanting to hunt down an item and what its history was, to start with this matrix and work their way backwards. This is the program guide, as I called it earlier. You can see circled in red there the CAC action that was taken. Some of the items were recommended to be approved by the commission. And others were recommended for further study and so forth. So the agency will now absorb this information and digest it and make a response, which is the next column over, yet to be filled in here. And all along, we're filling in the annotations, and we add to it as it goes through its life. So this particular document, as far as the public is concerned, is a replacement, modern-day replacement for what used to be a monograph that was produced, which was a very lengthy and boring reading document, I'm sure. It was long before I was here where tracking was done with prior to the use of this short-term or shorthand version of it. So, Leanne, see if there's a scroll down on this. Okay, thank you. Let me back out of this. We'll go to the next step here. We'll go to the comment period now. Good Lord, I can hardly read the darn slide. I hope it shows up better in somebody's laptop here. This is simply a shot of, oh, you can go ahead and back out a little bit. Yeah. This is our home page. And we try to make, during the rulemaking process, we try and make it as easy as possible. So you can see circled in the lower left corner of the slide here, it says 2018 cycle rulemaking. And so, Leanne, if you slide down to the next portion of that page, it opens up this page, and it's the entirety of the triennial code adoption cycle. We saw this just a moment ago, and this is your summary of all things that are going to take place. These are all the 4 steps, or the 3 important steps after the initiation of an item that we'll go through. And so this is home base for you during the rulemaking cycle. And notice the left margin here is in place for a number of housekeeping things in understandability of the rulemaking process. We define things such as what a CAC is and which CACs are active in this rulemaking cycle, as well as the ability to take you to other pages. See if there's more on the stretch down on that. Okay, let's go to the next then. All right, if you click on this, this is our rulemaking page, and Leanne, if you'll slide down, if I click on that, that's circled in red there, that link, it takes us to the first public comment launch. This is when the documents get put out there for the public to comment on officially. It's already been through the CAC committees. Recommendations were made. The agency has digested that information, and they've tweaked their provisions that they're proposing to launch, presumably, or not, and have given reasons for that. Up here are 2 important things to note. Number 1, in the yellow, difficult to read, but it states the name of the advisory committee that's hearing this, that heard this material. And so that is your link back in history, because it's important to have a backward and forward reach from this point right here, so that you can either dive back into time to see what the history was of a given item, or look forward from this point. So the in the red are, I think, these items are the ET is in here, the 45-day period information is here. There are possibility of 15-day here. You see a listing of several 15-day periods where some of the items took an extra circuitous route and went through an additional public comment period. But everything inside of in this case, the Access CAC was heard inside this 45-day comment period. And you see the HF for health facilities, that's the next one down below. Those are all CACs. Each one had their own period of public comments and so forth, be they 45, 15, or otherwise. Go ahead and slide down, Leanne, and we'll see. Okay, I opened up, don't go too far. I opened up Access here and inside that CAC, and you can see the agency names. And if you keep sliding down, Leanne, inside HCD, I opened up on this screenshot, and it reveals all the documents that were available during the 45-day period. Now, keep in mind the originating document, which is the notice of proposed action, is up at the top of this page there, so you can see overall what was being considered. And then down below in the HCD folder here, it shows 0118. So that's the package number. That's the rulemaking file number that's being heard with these documents. So if you have your package number and item number, you're all set. You can dive in immediately. Otherwise, it's exploration. Thankfully, most all of our documents are PDF converted when they're on the website, and they are, for the most part, searchable. And so, and even if not, you can probably still use Control F. It was a scanned copy, and get some headway made in that regard. So you'll notice there's a number of documents here. The ET and the ISOR are going to be here, of course, and then any other documents that are pertinent to it. Ultimately, if you scroll down just a touch more, Leanne. Is that it? Okay, all right. Down at the bottom, it got cut off a little bit. We're a listing of public comments. As each public comment comes in, it gets posted. So the CAM, the matrix is going to get updated, and they're going to be posted here so that the public has access to not only the documents produced by the agency, but the public response. Okay, let's go to the next item. Okay, and you can see this is one that's been through the mill now, and so we're starting to fill up all the rest of the columns here with the agency response to the CAC comments, and then it went into the 45-day, and so the 45-day, and if there were 15-day comments, they get listed here. My apologies, I grabbed the wrong matrix here. This is a 15-day matrix, but the 45-day matrices are identical to this. And actually, this serves both concerns, the 45 and the 15. That's why you'll see in bold the first 15 written here. That's the first 15-day comment as well, and above that in each block is a 45-day comment. So these are all the public comments or the commissioner comments or something like that that have historically attached themselves to any given particular item here. And then the annotations get modified to show kind of the shorthand version of what's come about. And what's remaining to take place is it's arrowed on the right side. The last column is the commission action on it. Okay, see if we have any more beneath that. Yeah. Okay, this is another example down below from a different rulemaking package showing the same thing. Some comments are simple, and we just note support or disapprove or something like that. All these abbreviations, actually, and I'll get into this here in a little bit, are now difficult to do given the access compliance issues that we have for website posted documents. So I'll show you some up and coming things. We've revamped this form a little bit in order to meet that need. It also, note over on the right side circled there under annotation, it says CFSOR, final statement of reasons. Here we give the shorthand version, and again, in having this living document be the program guide for us, we're able to go from this item, which we can identify with an item number over on the left column, or a section number out of the code book in the second column. And then it says CFSOR for response. You can see the full litany of response there. We just give the shorthand here. Okay? All right, see if there's any more in that column there. I don't think there is. Okay, let's bounce out and go to the next one. All right. The update to the Nopa, as well as the FSOR and FET, come to us in the final, and the matrices are posted to the web. You can see here we're starting on our home page again. Up above us, the 3 bullets are the places we've already been, and now this red circled item is one of the commission meetings. And then right below that, for each commission meeting, there are documents that have been posted with the Secretary of State, and so you actually see the approved items there. And some are modified during the commission meeting, and so they're hand delineated upon before they go to Secretary of State. So this is where you can read the final copy of what has been approved for adoption. See if there's anything underneath that there. Okay, here I'm inside one of those buttons here, and you can see there's, well, number one of interest there's an emergency rulemaking. This is another thing that makes the website complex a little bit too, is because we house not only the standard rulemakings that you're used to in everyday life, it's just, you know, the 18-month rulemakings, but also CWARs and emergency rulemakings appear here too. But down below where it says state proposing agency rulemakings, I use again, HCD as an example here, and if I click on that and open it, and you slide down below there, now you see the final documents. It was very similar earlier to the initial documents, but now we have a whole stack load of paperwork here, because everything that's in the final package appears here almost everything. The FSOR is here, but you don't get the pleasure of the ISOR here, and I suppose that's one of the things that we might consider in the future is having the ISOR automatically post here. Right now, I have to back out of this page and go to the initial submittal page in order to pick up the ISOR. I can still screen them both at the same time, comparing the ISOR to the FSOR, but it is an extra step. Keep scrolling down, and okay, here's where I picked up, I went from this final screen back to the initial screen. I picked up the initial statement of reasons and am comparing it to the final statement of reasons. So I can contrast and correlate items of interest that I'm looking for in looking at these two documents. I know that was one of the comments that we had about the old website. Hopefully the new website will address this. Okay, Leanne, I think that's the end of this one. Two more, folks. Here's a completed completed commission action matrix. You can see over on the far hand column, there on the right column, it's filled in now with a complete action. Now this does not get posted on the website in this state with the right hand column completed, but it is part of the record file that goes to the archive. So anyone a decade from now that wants to do research on this, on a particular item in here, does have a full and complete record. And if you scroll down, okay, this is the newly revamped, thanks to Laura the other day here, our accessibility compliant CAM now. It looks a little different. It generates a little more paper when you print it out, but nonetheless, it'll, as we go through, that's a starting item where we identify each item that's submitted to us, and then we take it through the public input sessions, and you can see the annotations and the columns are starting to be filled in. And if you go to the last one, Leanne, it'll show, there's your 45-day comments coming in. And I think there's one more, yeah, and then the commission action finally. So you can notice that the abbreviations are all gone, but largely the matrix table is set up in the same fashion. And each one of these will be garnered to color for the commission meeting to make it easier on the lives of our commissioners. I call them red, yellow, and green. I think they're called salmon, I don't know, okra and green, I hope. But at any rate, each of the color codes means something. The green sheets meaning uncontested items, the yellow sheets meaning that there was some question or comments about that from stakeholders and the public at large, and then red, or the salmon sheets, are items that were dropped and pulled by the agency as we went through the process, which they are permitted to do. Okay, back out of that, and I think we've got one. Do we have one more? Was that it? That's it. Okay, good. Let me make sure, check my notes to make sure we've I think overall what you walk away with is, in the initial phase, a particular proposed item will appear under the umbrella of CAC, okay, of the advisory committee. And then in the comment period, it loses that identifier as a primary moniker, but we still, to help navigation of our website and of the rulemaking process, we refer to those CACs throughout its life, actually, but it's less prevalent during the comment period and final. The final tends to drag the items in under the commission's umbrella, so we put it in their terms. So these things morph and kind of migrate, but if you have the rulemaking package number and the item number, you can find your way no problem. Some agencies submit to us using item numbers where they define it. We prefer that. Other agencies allow us, well, I'm not sure they allow us, but we actually have to go into their rulemaking docs and assign the rulemaking numbers for them so that we can break their large 22-page treatise here for their proposed regulations into bite-sized chunks for the commissioners to handle. That way they can take independent actions on each of the pieces there, or groups of pieces, rather than the whole thing as based on, if there's an issue with one, it doesn't shoot down their entire package. So we divide it up for the agencies that way. We like it when the agencies determine their own item numbers, and it actually presents better to the public. We think it's a little more understandable, but not all agencies are required to do that. Okay, I think this concludes our introductory presentation, Chair, so we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Gary, for that very thorough presentation. First, I'd like to ask if there are any questions from any of the subcommittee members.
Yeah, but I think we're going to have a discussion period later after we hear testimony.
We are.
I'll defer.
Okay. Or any other of my fellow commissioners at this time? Anything about the website itself or the statutorily driven characteristics?
Statute, I guess, how much flexibility do we have to tinker with things?
Yeah. Thank you. I meant to mention something at the beginning here. If this committee, subcommittee, makes a recommendation today for us to study something or do so, we have a easel over here for action items. We'll note them down and then report back at some point when we investigate something to see what the possibilities are. If it involves anything that affects building standards law as far as procedure, process, et cetera, or APA, we'll have to take it into the next cycle if we make that endeavor. And then, so it would be optional at the upcoming cycle for the agencies, but we could make something mandatory after that cycle happens. The effort, I think Mike and I want to emphasize today that we've got a set of tools in the toolbox here right now. They're pretty tried and true. We want to improve them first hopefully before we add new tools to the bin. That's our objective, is to make sure these tools are well working.
I guess, is this one on?
Yes.
I'm thinking more of kind of rearranging how things are presented rather than forging a whole new path. So I don't think I'm departing. I don't think I'm going to be in radical territory. One thing you mentioned, though, that actually I think is worth bringing up now, just as a question, most of the agencies seem to have been doing is somewhere between a housekeeping and maybe a real change question, is moving forward existing changes. You mentioned that those are not subject to regulatory review. I mean, basically, I would think that if you said A is B last time, you need to say it again this time, or you go back to the model code. So that I would think that that carrying forward existing changes actually needs to be accounted for. But the question is if it's put on the agenda, or whether it's the CAC or the commission, it seems to be subject to review. Like you could say, I like the model code better than I like the state change.
Yeah.
Mike, did you want to respond to that? Or?
Yeah, is this on? I can't tell.
It is.
Okay. Yeah. So part of the process as we set this up is, like you guys know, and Gary went through in detail, establishing the process we follow with the documents we have.
Let me follow up on just one thing. Sort of the reason I'm asking the question is,
right,
is I think that oftentimes, particularly users who are external, the public making comments, or practitioners, or even other code officials, or that kind of thing, is when you see this matrix with something which says this code we're going to do this code change to section 310 or whatever it is, even if it has an E, people could be led to comment. And the question is that comment actionable, or are you leading people to comment about something that they can't do anything about anyway?
Well, and I think that's where I was struggling trying to explain the difference between a new model code and a triennial cycle and perhaps what's going to happen in the intervening. So let's go to the triennial, since that is kind of the subject of this whole process.
I'm focusing on that, yeah.
So when a new model code comes out, there may be changes that occur to that model. And there may be amendments that have been applied to similar sections in the previous edition. So when the new model comes out, the agencies obviously have to review that and see if there are changes to the sections that they had amendments to. If there were, then they need to address whatever changes need to happen to either continue the amendment or modify it to fit to the new model code language. Now, in regulations, when an agency proposes an amendment, it will not go away until that agency repeals that amendment. And that's regulation. That's the way the regulations work. If it were, in fact, needed to review everything each cycle, I think we'd have much more voluminous rulemaking packages, number one, maybe more than could be handled appropriately or efficiently during a triennial cycle. And then number two, I think it forces the agencies to re-justify things that they had previously gone through the rulemaking process to get approved and printed into the code. It opens it up for conversation again. And so anything that the agency proposed in a previous cycle then becomes subject to comment. And if people think that's open, they're going to comment on it because they may have a vested interest in a change for that item. So with that, in the rules, you only want to show what you're proposing to change, the amendments you're going to make, either addition or deletion, and then the adoption of the model code language that you're looking to include in your package. We've asked the agencies not to include existing language that's not being proposed for the simple fact that it adds a lot of additional paper to the process, but more importantly, it opens those sections up for the agencies. Then they may have to respond in a comment period, and they were never proposing to change that in the first place. I see, Mia, did you want to say anything?
I was just seeing where it was going.
Okay.
Oh, I'll interject. I put a sample up on the screen here for everyone to
Okay,
look
good.
at. This is a pretty good example, not the best I've seen, but a pretty good example of charging language at the beginning of a particular item within here, in this case, Chapter 3 is Item 4. And implied in that statement up there that's underlined and in bold is the fact that they're giving up rights to the previous edition and pulling in the model edition and pulling up any existing amendments they've made previously into the code, so that their proper duty has been executed by this charging statement, and so there would not necessarily be a need to restate that anywhere within the documents. But this is not thoroughly complete. It doesn't say bring forward existing amendments. I've seen that type too. But we get all manner of variation from this from the agencies.
One of the ways that I've in the past have explained to people what happens with something that's been modified is if an agency amends it and puts it in the code, it's going to stay until they physically remove it. So it can't be removed by BSC. We can't not republish it. It has to go forward. It's part of the record. And only when the agency wants to modify or make some change to it is it necessary that they put it out to the public for input. I think we want to be careful of how much we open up existing information moving forward to comment. Now, having said that, if in the beginning of the process, during say the intervene or during the pre-cycle, as we call it, the initial portion, if a public member knows the code, knows the provision that an agency may have in the code, and they think it should be changed, there's a process for that, and they can petition the agency to carry a change for that item. And we have a setup for that in regulation. So if there are concerns, people can get the agency to include those items that they're concerned about if the agency concurs with the comment that's sent in during that pre-cycle, during the development phase, if you will. Once they submit and it goes into the process, we limit what the agencies can add They can take away, but they can't add more unless it's sufficiently related and not substantive.
But I think the confusion, and I think you said the same thing twice, and I think I got it the first time and the second, is that unless something that's existing state amendments are proposed to be repealed, they remain, even if they're published as an existing amendment. I mean, the fact that you put it out, you might open it up for discussion, but unless there's a proposal to repeal it, just reprinting an existing amendment doesn't open it for consideration.
It doesn't by itself, but I think when you put it into a rulemaking document and you show the language, that opens the door for somebody to comment.
Well,
and here's the way it might work. The agency would receive a comment to something they weren't proposing for change, and that's fine. They would respond in that manner. They would say, well, thanks for the comment, but it wasn't being proposed for change, so we'll take this in consideration perhaps in the next cycle. So what that does, though, is it adds that work level to the agency. So now they're responding to a lot of things, explaining that they're not going to be changing it, but they'll carry it forward, as opposed to
it
not
also, I
having it there
think,
for
leads to
comment.
confusion. The reason I'm thinking about it from the user's point of view, let me use an example, and actually Eric and I participated in this, and I think it's non-controversial. There's a couple of others I'd like to talk about, but I won't bring up. But one of them, the 17 to 18-inch water closet,
Centerline.
going from 18-inch absolute to some flexibility, which is 16 to 18 in the model code or in the ADA, that if DSA proposes to continue that, they don't have to say anything.
Right.
If they said 17 to 18E, it would still be really informational but leads people to comment, which is probably a mistake. If they intended to say, okay, well, we'd like to make it more flexible and put out for discussion that we should go back to the ADA standard of 16 to 18, you would publish that as new language. It's those E's that I think that are problematic, of where you're carrying forward something you don't intend to change, that gets very confusing for users.
And I totally agree, and I've tried in a number of cycles over the years to get the agencies to not print that information in moving forward, so that doesn't add to the complexity of the document. And there's a point here that I'm getting at, is that in years past, it was mentioned earlier, we're not sure what happened many years ago. Maybe Mike knows because he was here. Well, we had very small rulemaking packages. We didn't have these 200 and 300-page packages. It just didn't happen because of the amount of information the agencies were submitting. They were submitting only the changes they wanted to make, and that was it. And that worked well. Everybody knew what they were proposing. There wasn't confusion. Is this change? Are you going to do this? What are you doing about this? You show it, but it doesn't have any underline, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of how it's grown over time. We went through a couple phases. 1 year, the agencies complained because there was a lot of publishing issues with moving mid-cycle changes forward to the code. So we'd have a brand new triennial. We'd go through the mid-cycle intervening. And then when we went to the next triennial, the intervening cycle stuff, because it comes into the code so late, was being missed in many occasions by the publisher. So then we had these huge errata packets and these problems with missing material. The agencies, granted, were very upset, and they were not very comfortable with the process. So they started saying, we need to have a better way to show what moves forward so we can be sure the publishers get everything moved forward. So the decision at that time, and in retrospect, bad decision, but it was a decision made at the time, that we should have a two-part express term. The front of it, part one, is the proposed changes, and that's it, only proposed changes. Part two was all their existing amendments moving forward without change. And that was, in concept, seemed like a good answer. We gave it to the publisher, there was no missing, nothing would get lost. The problem is it became these massive amounts of submittals, 400-page submittals, with a lot of material that wasn't proposed for change, and then a little twist was added. Editorial changes, well, those could end up in part two because they were editorial. So now you did have changes in part two, and so people were confused. Is this the entire rulemaking? And this is a lot of stuff. So we said, let's not do that anymore. Some agencies have agreed, some haven't. And so some of them still submit a lot of existing material for fear of it not being moved forward. So that's one of the reasons for this, because we want to establish that we're going to work. We have a new publishing process. We've worked on it this time, and it worked really well. We had an initial review of the documents with everything blended, and the publishers helped us to put this together. We called it a baseline, and that's what the agencies got to review prior to it going out and getting fully vetted or fully incorporated with the new changes. So they got to see what was there and how it was going to be once it was all blended together, making sure that everything got moved. It was a great process because I know the fire marshal and a couple found some big chunks that were missing. Same reason. It was an intervening cycle change, and it got missed during the transfer of information to the new code. So that caught a lot of that. And with that, we're very excited about the new publication. We think there are going to be very few problems and mistakes in it this time because of this early process we established. So that being the case, there's no need to provide all the existing amendments moving forward. The rule is if you don't modify it and you don't put it into your rulemaking, it's not going to go away.
So
It's gonna stay there.
essentially revert back to part one.
Exactly. So that's kind of full circle. Then what's happened and how we've come to this point. There's been a lot of people requesting things to be done certain ways over time, and we've tried to accommodate that, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. So that's kind of we're at that next step now, trying to hybrid, make it a little bit more efficient than it was before. Did you want to add anything?
No, the only thing I'll add, I think you guys caught everything on the go. Is what added to confusion this cycle was some agencies showed their existing amendments being carried forward, which would appear as if it's a new language.
Yes.
And then other agencies did not. So that adds, as Mike mentioned, and you guys have seen, that adds to the dialogue, it adds to the confusion. And so eliminating that existing amendments being carried forward will help reduce that confusion. Now, that said, we've had some state agencies say, well, the reason they show that is it shows their stakeholders, it's kind of a historical knowledge, if you will, of why is this in the code, because then the ISOR will explain why this is in the code. But like Mike said, it won't go away. So maybe there's a different way for them to show that historical information to their code users. And Greg, do you want to chime in on that? Because as a state agency, they all have different
They got different reasons.
constituencies that need different things too. So we're trying to,
Now, for the state fire marshal, we only put our changes in there. We did keep part two.
Use the mic so those on the phone can hear. Thanks.
We did keep part two, not to reprint all the things, but to put that, we do adopt this chapter with amendments to these sections, but we didn't show the sections.
And that's
That-
fine.
That was a little different, so we didn't bring all the other information in there, but at least kept that record of, we have amendments here, we are adopting this chapter, we're not adopting this chapter.
yeah,
That was
yeah.
another option, a hybrid
Okay.
of those.
Okay.
And like I said, this really becomes more of an issue during triennials because of the sheer volume of material and the fact that with the new models, it really forces the agencies to write a lot of new amendments sometimes. So in the intervening, it's really, there's no model issues there. It's just state language going forward or being modified. And it's no need to show all these other things because the code is the code. It's going to be in place for another, 2 years from that point. So so it's really a triennial issue. In the both triennial and intervening, some of the other issues we have, and we'll talk more about it when we get into some of the ET docs and stuff, but there are times when a model code, and this is pretty prevalent, they'll rearrange things. They'll move sections to new locations. It may not change the language, but it gets relocated for organizational purposes and, it formats better, whatever they think the reason is. And there are amendments to the agencies that apply to those. And so then the agencies say, okay, well, what do I do? I'm not changing the language, but it's moved. And so now do I show it stricken and then show it underlined again? Well, that looks like you're repealing and then doing a new amendment.
Yeah.
So then the whole thing's open for discussion again. So we, after seeing this happen a number of times and questions coming up, we now we request that the agencies provide the formally this section number in parens, and then the new section number underlined in the parens section, and then the section without underline or strikeout. So and in the ISOR it says this was in this location, model code change, we had to relocate it here, no changes being proposed. Now, it may still be subject to somebody's comment because it's in print, but the agency can defer it because they weren't proposing a change as long as they explain it clearly in the ISOR. And that's the other element that we're going to get into in our training in a couple of weeks, expanding the ISOR and making them more complete. I think that'll help the confusion of the reader if we have more complete, accurate information in the eyesore. So, separate issue. But that's another example of how things, unintended consequences occur because of the changes from model to, and in a triennial cycle. So we're working through them. I think the version that we have this time will address a number of things, but some of these items are still going to happen, and we're going to have to work with the agencies as we go forward to try to mitigate them as much as possible.
Thanks, Mike. That's a good explanation of it, because the two things that I hear most frequently are, yeah, I can't tell if it's an existing amendment or not because not all the agencies do it the same way.
Yeah.
And two is, I think it would help to manage the expectations of the public if they knew that there's items that we really can't change at that point. And so they come full bore with a very passionate argument, and then you're sort of stuck saying, well, I can't really do anything about it.
Yeah, and I think it's been a case for us too. We always want to try to accommodate the agencies. It's their provisions, their authority, and they have certain things they want to do. And so we try to accommodate their concerns and their desires. While that won't change, we'll still try to do that. We found that by being too lenient or too permissive, we're getting this really complicated series of regs from all different directions. And like you said, the consistency for the user, for the reader, isn't there, and so they have a really hard time tracking it, especially if they're looking at multiple agencies or multiple topics. So that's part of the reason for the consistency of the documents. We're going to set them up in a fashion like we put in your book, where it's a logical process. You start at chapter 1 and you go to the end of the book. You do it like you're reading a book. You don't jump around from chapter to chapter. So, and again, these are things I don't want to get too far into here because we're going to do our training on it. But we want you to be aware, with the documents we have, the recommendations we're going to provide to the agencies so that they can improve the format and then the consistency. So if you look at the Fire Marshal's package or HCD or DSA, it virtually has the same feel and look. It's just the content of the information that is different. So that's the idea, and that's kind of what we're looking for feedback. I know some of the comments we'll talk about suggested additional documents to show the information in a different manner. And while that may be useful in some ways, I think it's important to understand that the process we've developed over this time has in some ways been shaped by the agencies and the difficulty they've had meeting timeframes with the staffing they've had, with the complexity of changes from the model and the volume of changes from model code changes. Those things really impact the ability of the agencies to meet the timeframes of the cycle. So there are shortcuts made and other things done to try to improve that process. And our new suggestions, I think, are going to take some of those variables out and hopefully give them a good direction to follow. And the accessibility aspect of this whole thing with the websites changing, that's going to help too. It's a lot of work to do it, but I think it's going to require all of us to follow a certain format so that it can be used online and posted, and we'll just have to have it received in that format. So I don't know if that answers the questions regarding the process, but we're making every attempt we can to fix it and make it better.
Thank you, Mike. No, I think it does. And I think another potential benefit might be that by reducing the volume, it allows both the committee, the CAC members, as well as the public to focus on what's really being changed.
Yes.
And not get distracted.
I agree.
Were there any other comments or questions from the audience here? Crystal.
On the tracking numbers that you assign,
Thank you. There's people online, so they can't hear you unless you're on a mic.
Crystal Sujeski, CAL FIRE Office, State Fire Marshal. I have a question on the tracking numbers that are signed for the matrix that goes to the Code Advisory Committee. The tracking numbers and items assigned don't seem to correlate with the chapters that they're associated with. So like if you're working in chapter 4, it's like the item number is 5 or 6.
Right.
And so that's
yeah,
really
Crystal, I agree. It doesn't follow that. Part of what we tried to do in in the matrix action tables, or the commission action tables, action matrices, excuse me, is to break the packages down to the point where an agency doesn't lose a group of items because of a problem with one item. And I say that because in previous years, we didn't have them itemized as well as we do now. In other words, we didn't take every single proposed code change and give it its own action item. So it would be done by chapter or by part and chapter. And so the result was, in some cases, there'd be a major issue with a particular item. And because it wasn't broken down, the commissioners couldn't take it out of sync with the rest, so they had to disapprove the whole section. And that carried more weight than the intent of the change. So they didn't want to have to reject this whole group of things, but there's no way for them to say just that section, not the other sections. So to help them, we created this table that every change you guys propose is going to get an item. And because it's all part of a part, we're not going to associate it with the chapter, because it's going to start to duplicate numbers, because you're going to have a 2, a 2-1, and then you're going to have a 3-1, and then you might have a 4-1, and then those keep duplicating over again. I think that could get it confusing for the user. So we went with the series numbers that fit into our table, starting with number 1 until you get to the last item. So if you have 100 items, there's going to be 100 items in there. We do break it up by chapter by the table heading. So each table heading will go from chapter 4 to chapter 5, and we put the information in the top of the table that explains what came from the eyesore of the agency. So they say adopt the entire chapter with amendments, without amendment, whatever it is. We write that out at the top of the table and then itemize the sections so that they can be taken independently, and that allows the agencies to carry more of their package through the cycle so they don't lose chunks that they weren't intending to, if that makes sense. That's kind of how we got the individual items. Whether it's chapter numbered or not, we can certainly consider that and look at how that works. If it seems to work fine and it makes sense and people like it, we can certainly consider that for sure. One other quick thing, you'll notice the difference between the two tables, the one that Gary had in the presentation and then the table that we just most recently looked at, which was the kind of lateral version. And that's the accessible version of the table. And so it's going to look a lot different than it does now. And I think it's a much simpler table than we currently have. So you're not going to have all those acronyms. They're going to be all explained out. And you're not going to have all the cells within a cell trying to show you different actions. They're all individually shown. I think it was the very last one you did and final. No, it wasn't that. It was one that your sample of. Right. That's it. No, that's part of the new one there. So you can see it's a much more simplified view of the table. But other than that, everything else will be the same. Now, the other thing we're going to work on is expanding annotation. So the annotated information in the table will be more reflective of the eyesore language from the agency's submittal. So the tables will grow a little bit because we're going to have more information in there instead of just a simple see the eyesore or see the F-sore that kind of makes you go through multiple documents. I think these can be copy clipped and made into a more usable tool. Again, the thing that's important to remember about these tables, while it is a tool for anybody that wants to use it, it was developed for the commissioners to be able to see a particular item at any point during the process and know what's happening to it. So you can look at one individual code section and see what happened to it through the entire cycle at the very end at the approval stage. So that's the reason for it, because it's a voluminous set of documents and it's hard to track a particular item without something like this. So we're trying to make it easier to track by providing it. Unfortunately, in some cases, it's more confusing for some. So we're looking at alternates for that as well.
Are there any other comments from the audience?
I have one other question, but I'm not sure if this is the right time, is on the possible formatting that we're moving forward. Is this the time for that?
I think we're on 2A and B. The formatting will be coming up, right, Mike?
Okay.
I think it's coming up,
I think.
so hang on just a second. Seeing no other questions in the audience, if we could go to the phones, please.
You have 0 questions remaining.
Thank you, Leanne. So with that, let's move on to the next agenda item. It's agenda item 3, which is comments received about the process and the documents that were prepared for discussion. If I could ask Building Standards Commission member, staff member, to please present the agenda item?
I'm sorry, was that?
That's okay. I'm looking for who's going to present item 3.
Oh, I'll go ahead and start with that.
Okay,
And
thank you,
then
Mike.
Gary was just letting me know, oh, we need to break. Great, thanks, Laura. We probably should take this opportunity to break. We got about an hour, so I want to give everybody a chance to, if you need to, take a 5-minute, and then we'll get back and finish up.
Okay,
Okay.
let's take a 5-minute break then. Thank you.
So I guess item 3 is the comments, right?
Everybody to be seated again, we can reconvene. And I believe we're moving on to the next agenda item, which is item 3. And if staff's ready, Mike, you ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is this on? Yeah. So item 3 is really more of a summary of the comments that we received. And this isn't all the comments. This is some of the commenters that mainly are Code Advisory Committee members, one of our commissioners, some of our staff who went through this whole process, and some of our staff are relatively new. We have a couple of technical staff that have only gone through a cycle or two, and they're still learning, but they come with a fresh perspective. So it helps us get feedback because they don't know that there's already a way you do it, so they would like to see it done a different way. So that's what these comments are for, and we tried to summarize. But then we also included the full breadth of the comments in a packet, so if you really want to read the whole comment, you can. And there were some common themes in the comments, and some of them have already been discussed, but I'll touch on some of them here and now. And that is the confusing manner in which the rulemaking documents were prepared by the different agencies. So the lack of consistency, I would say, between the packages. The difficulty tracking a particular item from the beginning of the cycle to the end of the cycle. If you had interest in a topic or a specific item, some of the comments were it's nearly impossible to figure out where to go and what to find. Some of the things we've tried to develop to address those issues are the timeline that we're talking about that goes online that has an active timeline. So you can come into the website, see the timeline for the entire cycle, and pick a point on the timeline. Maybe it's the date that you are now, July 17th, and you click on that date, and it'll give you a drop down of all the elements that are active at that time or what's occurring in the rulemaking process at that time. I think that's a nice tool and may address some of the confusion as to where to go and how to find things. Now, I'll say this because I think it's important for everybody to understand is that rulemaking as a general process is a very complicated, difficult process. And then you add the complexity of Title 24 and all of its various parts and elements and processes, and it becomes an extremely complicated process. So then just to add more fun, each agency has its own vested authority in law, and they're writing regulations in a coordinated fashion, but really for their purposes, for the authority and references they have. They may be following legislative mandates, or they may be following their own statutory requirements, but they have to do that because that's the authority they have to promulgate changes to Title 24. So they really keep themselves in their own silos, and we try to make sure that through our workshops and through our development, the coordination elements occur between agencies that have overlapping regulation. So the long and short of it is there's no way to make it super simple and really easy. We can add more tools, we can add more processes to show and provide different methods. I've heard some really good suggestions, and I think we'll probably hear a few more once we get to the documents. And I think the result will be a little less confusion, but I don't think we're ever going to be able to solve the confusion issue. It's just the nature of the beast, if you will, but hopefully we can eliminate some of it. So I don't know if you want to go through and I can read some of these real quick. And
sure, maybe you can just give us a flavor of the
That
kind of
sounds
comments
good.
we got.
So the first comment we have was sent in to us from a Code Advisory Committee. Really great guy, and he works really hard, and he's served on a number of code advisories over the years and always has really good input. I believe he's got a fire background, and his name is Armin Wolski, and I think he was from, I think it was the Building, Fire, and Other Committee. Armin mentioned that the structure of how a given item is proposed by an agency, navigation challenges relating the item to a portion of the express terms is really difficult to follow. It needs to be sequenced in a logical manner to all items rather than grouping by subject. And when I finish this, I'll mention something about that. Or other criteria. Recommend having BSC's process mimic to a great extent the ICC model code process. Now, he mentioned in here grouping by subject. that used to not be a thing. And many years back, it was just done in descending order like we talked about, chapter 1, 2, 3, et cetera. But at some point, and it wasn't the agencies, I believe it was code advisory committees and the public, interested parties had said, it's hard to jump all around to find all the elements affecting this particular code change because there may be sections in other chapters or other codes that are being impacted by this change. So the thought was, well, let's group them by item, and then the agency can say, this is the change and here's the related items. The downfall was they printed everything. They printed the change and all the related items in whatever order they thought. And so you had multiple chapters all occurring in one item. And they were supposed to be related. And it just created a real confusing looking package. And those items that were related were also proposed code changes in another part of the package. So do you see them all together in this one in different chapters and take motions on them then, or do you see them as they come up later? Some agencies did it the first way, where they grouped them all, and that was the only time. Others showed them, but then they showed up again later. And in some cases, there'd be an existing amendment that was amended one way, where it was a related change, but then when it became its own change, it had a different change in it. And so it really was confusing. You couldn't figure out what was supposed to be done. So we're going to we've come up with a new way to show that when we get to the documents, where you're going to have your item, that your proposed change, all its own item, and then you will have a list of related items. But instead of repeating all the information, we're simply going to ask that you show the related item by its code section only. So you could have a listing of kind of like they do in the code book now with definitions, where you have definitions in chapter 2, and then you have the actual definition word within the chapter that it's located, but you got to get the information from chapter 2. It just says this word's used in this chapter. So I think that shows, it keeps it simple. Here's the code change, and here are the sections that you'll find later in a document that are also impacted by this change. If we do it that way and the eyesore is written well, I think it'll flow real well, and it'll be a lot easier to see what the code change is that's being addressed at that time. Gary?
Mike, if I may interject at this point, there's a sample of this in your binders under tab 4, an eyesore and an ET. For those in this room, there are samples. I have a few. You can see me for them. They're also on the back table. And for those who are watching on YouTube, these samples are attached to the notice so that you can access them.
Thanks, Gary. So I'll go on to the next one. Commissioner Mickelton also had some concerns about the process and wanted to provide some information and wrote an acceptance of DSA's format, improvement of proposals, a separate document that agencies have developed is a good process. Recommends that this format as a basis for an eyesore that any agency provides. So, and maybe Commissioner Mickelton can explain a little bit more detail in that, because this is a summarized version of his comment. Did you want to say something about that?
Briefly, the DSA, I think it was then the intervening cycle last time around, had a particularly good format that had a perfect, I thought, balance of information between existing code, enough of that gives the reader context and an understanding of what the topic is, and then but not repeating too much, so as to not either A, confuse people, or B, beg too many opportunities for comment on things that are not actually being proposed to change. The graphic format of that was also very good. It had very clear banners for the different sections that, as a code reviewer for, I think, all of the commissioners, it definitely made the process of reviewing a fairly substantial package much more efficient, much faster, and actually more accurate to me as well. And I think that format would be a great template to look at for all of the agencies to be starting with. I thought that was a tremendous improvement.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, and I think we'll look into that rulemaking package and get that information so we can kind of share it with the agencies. We're planning an agency rulemaking training very soon, and so we'll be providing a lot of feedback to the agencies and giving them some tools to use. And on the concept, real quickly, of additional documents to include in the rulemaking that aren't currently required. This cycle, we'd like for people, agencies in particular, to certainly consider incorporating the extra tools as they can, as they are able with the staffing and timeframes. However, it's not going to be something that would be if it were missing, would be a rejectable item. So we're not going to not accept your package if you don't have this in it. But we are going to propose likely some regulations for Part 1 so that in the next major triennial cycle, we will have an additional step or tool that the agencies can utilize to kind of explain the information similar to what DSA has provided. So we'll look at that and have something to look at, I think, in the training session. Next comment was from Ali Fatah. He's a building official in Southern California and has been a CAC member many times and has a great interest in the outcome of the rulemaking. And he recommended having BSC mimic the ICC process as well. And that's kind of a theme in a lot of the comments from the CAC members. Many of them work through the ICC process and they're familiar with it. And it is a good process, but there is a major distinction that typically in the ICC, they'll have a particular item that is addressed, and then that item will be the change, and that will go through the entire process as an item. All the other elements are addressed and talked about, the committee's review for that item. And with BSC, or with all the agencies, there may be 2,000 or 3,000 items. You just don't know. And so it's really hard to set up that same methodical tracking for each individual item. We'd have reams and reams of rulemaking documents trying to show all that repetitive information. So we'll have to look at that as a last resort kind of condition. However, I think the ICC process has good merit, and there may be steps within that we can incorporate as we do the review. So we'll look at that. And then moving on, Kerwin Lee, who also is a Code Advisory Committee member and an architect, been involved in our process for many years, has had a lot of recommendations. We included his full comment as an attachment because he had a lot to say, but we did try to summarize here. So difficulty in following the process was his main theme. Incorporating a picture of all the steps taken for a given item on the website, separate tab search required to follow a given item, trouble tracking what was revised after a given notice or a given action, explanations for revisions that weren't available. In other words, he was referring to some of the language in the ISOR that didn't really explain the intent or why the CAC made a recommendation the way they did, or why the agency did or didn't accept it. So a little bit more explanation and detail in that. And then lack of consistency among the agencies on pertinent documents, lack of reason and justification, and then substantial revisions without proper documentation. Now, I think we really focus on that because that's an important step within the rulemaking. They have to have all the proper documentation and information. So we'll be working with Kerwin more as we move forward. He's a CAC member this time too. And so we'll try to get some more direction from him on some of those items. And then CBSC staff had some really good suggestions as well. So too wide a variation of submittals in the documents that were submitted. We have templates that are consistent and they weren't followed. So inconsistencies in the legends. So agencies like to try to expand our legend a little bit and to add other methods and forms of the rulemaking as they're showing it, when they should all be the same for greatest public understandability. So, and I agree with staff on that because we get a lot of calls. People are confused about what's going on. The ETs and the final ETs display items in a manner other than ascending numerical sequence. So again, that jumping around from section to chapter to section, and it's very confusing for the user. Let me see. Different approaches to a given section affecting another section can cause confusion. lack of consistency in the numbering of the agency's items. That kind of goes through where the agencies itemize their sections within their express term. DSA Access likes to put 11B in front of all their item numbers, so they go 11B item 1, 11B item 2, et cetera, et cetera. Well, all that information is what we use for our matrix table numbering that Crystal was talking about. And they'll get really confusing because we're trying to use our rulemaking file number that we established, and then whatever numbering sequence that they itemized, that the agency used to itemize. So you can imagine if you got a really long item number, and then we try to hook it into our BSC number, it gets really messy. And then they're all different. Some are doing item 1, some are doing item 1.1. So it just, we're going to get consistency, and we're going to tell them to follow the format we've provided. And let's see, multiple entries for a given section. Okay, kind of that lack of consistency, charging language at the beginning of the document. So we also provide the templates, and we give the statutory required language from either BSC law or from APA that helps the agency with the rulemaking document. So we try to set that up so they don't have to create that language. And so there's a little confusion there. Some agencies do a really good job of explaining briefly the intent, and so we're going to work with those to show examples to the others. And then incomplete ISOR and FSOR information supporting the ET and FET actions during the process, such as information, as such information is acquired. So just inconsistency in the way that the documents come together at the end. Which is, again, the theme you're hearing is the inconsistency. So that's all of item 3 as far as the comments. The other comments that we did receive just in general over time are really reflective of these, so we felt these were a good sampling of what we're finding people are having trouble with. I don't know if there's any comments or questions there.
I have a question, and it just occurred to me, so maybe I haven't thought it through.
Okay.
So I can see how some agencies have to deal with a much more variable. Their changes reflect variable subject matter, like the State Fire Marshal's Office. They have to deal with a whole slew of different topics. And renumbering it just in a numerical order might be more confusing in their package versus somebody else's package that is just handling water saving or handling, I'm not sure, ADA. They're dealing with laboratory occupancy, then they're dealing with some other subject matter like sprinkler amendments. Whatever it is it because of specific agencies having a more consistent package in what they're trying to amend versus other agencies that have a much bigger plethora of subject matter that they have? If they were to repackage it, it would be very confusing for somebody to review. Is that some of the problem is just because of the nature of what the different agencies have to present? And it's just, I know I heard there, and it didn't occur to me until now that maybe it's because they have to deal with a lot broader subject matter and different topics.
Yes,
So
I think
would like some
absolutely
feedback.
that. Yeah, I agree. I think that absolutely has an impact on the complexity, the difficulty of following an item, or even the difficulty of the agency preparing the information. I think another good example is when you see provisions from OSHPOD or from DSA in their structural packages. They got these packages that are 150 pages of mass calculations and a lot of information for an essential service structure. And so it's very complicated, difficult to follow, difficult to show. So I do think that's an element. We've always tried to work with the agencies, understanding the difficulties that they have, to try to be flexible. But there's going to be certain things we're going to have to maintain some consistency on. And we think if we can do that, that'll actually take some of the confusion out. Because I think what's adding to some of it is the method in which it's being presented. It may be clearer if it's presented in a different way, but that's still yet to be seen. And we have to get feedback from those who are writing the stuff too.
I agree. Whatever we come up with has to be consistent. It just makes, and I'm not coming up with a solution right now in my head. I just wrap my head around the problem at this point. But I didn't even, it didn't occur to me that that might be one of the bigger issues, is that
I think it is, and it kind of it speaks to what I mentioned earlier, that no matter how simplified we would like the process to be, it's a really complicated process. And so with some agencies, way more complicated than others. And I know the fire marshal probably of all has some of the biggest lift, some of the heaviest lift, because they're also involved in a lot of things that are at the top of the chart right now as far as interest. And I know that they have staffing issues because, and I think Greg would like to come up and speak to that. Thanks, Greg.
Before you get started, Greg, did anybody here on the subcommittee have any other questions?
We get a comment period after?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've got a comment card too as well, so Carl, I won't forget you. Go ahead, Greg, I'm sorry.
Okay, Greg Anderson. One thing I did want to bring up with the ICC, because it's being compared and we're looking at numerical order. They have their proposals with numbers that may be numerical that are assigned by ICC. The proposal comes in and then it's assigned, but they're presented and heard during the hearings based on topic. So the numbers may jump all over the place, but they're all grouped together by topic. So when you hear about this section, it's all grouped together so you understand what's going on. And if you're looking at the monograph, it's all over the place until you see the listing that is being heard at. So we have always put in our, the state fire marshal's office based on the topic. So if we're talking about WUI, here's all what we're doing with the WUI through our work groups. If we're talking about the L occupancy work group, which is all over the book. Yeah. For just, even though it may be a cleanup package, we're looking in chapter 2, 3, 4, 5, and it keeps going, right? And then the fire code. And so to have it just in numerical order, it's going to be, to me, very confusing unless we hear it in order by topic. And I don't know whether we assign them numbers numerical and then hear them by topic, or whether we're assigning the number or the Building Standards Commission is, which would be like the way ICC does it. Mm-hmm. So if you're dealing just with 11A or Chapter 11, yeah, it's grouped together. Or our WUI is actually a very good example. It's all in 7A. Well, that's easy. It's probably all going to be numerical. But a lot of our work groups are going to be all over the books in all different parts. And we do break apart the parts into different packages, just so it's nice. And we also agree there's consistency. And I think it really did help when we didn't reprint all the existing ones that we weren't doing. Just put up what our changes on there. Mm-hmm. That's it for now.
Thanks, that's a good point, because the model code process is sort of intended so that when the public comes to testify, they can testify on all the items that are related in that group, as you said.
But we're also hearing them in the same order.
Correct.
So, and the same with the commission. I think you would like to talk about the same topic at the same time, rather than go numerical through the book. And we also will have the issue, let's look at Chapter 5 with height and areas. Do we do a proposal for one group with our R2.2s? Well, we're also doing another change in there based on the I3s. Do we put those both work groups on the same proposal because it's to the same table, or do we talk about it differently through the topic?
It's difficult, because an OSHPOD can make the argument that I've got OSHPOD 1 requirements and I go through all of them, but I also have the same requirements for OSHPOD 4, so I go through all of them again. And I think that's the struggle that we're all going to have.
Yep, it's definitely one of those are some of the elements that we are challenged with, for sure.
Well, we got good minds on it, so I'm sure we can come up with some good compromises.
The other question, and this is a little different on one of our processes on the 399. When we have something that's mandated very specific, let's say batteries for garage doors, which is mandated, is there a cost that we have to justify, or it's already in law? A side note.
And Mia can
If I could, I've got a speaker.
that real quick.
Go ahead, you want to go? Oh.
Right. A lot of times we have to make our regulations, and I understand that, but when it's in law. Interesting thought.
Yeah.
I do have a speaker card from Carla from HCD. If you'd like to come up, please. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me. Carla DeRosa with HCD. I'm actually here on behalf of Emily Withers, who could not be with us here today. I have two items that I think fall into this category, and forgive me if they don't. But regarding the last code cycle and previous code cycles, we would like to see a little bit more advance notice for public comments received, sometimes because of the time that they were received or the delay in posting them on the website, we would not get them in time. That caused a little bit of confusion when it came to preparing our final documents and submitting them in the short time frame. So we would like to see the comments posted a little bit or as soon as possible, just so that our agency and as well as other agencies, we can address those accordingly, and it's not the last
Carl, you're
minute.
speaking about the decisions that are made here.
Yes.
Once it goes through this process to get it back to you.
For like the 45-day, sometimes we have 45-day, 15-day, an additional 15-day. So those comments are coming pretty fast, and then once we receive them, we have to put them into the FSOR and then prepare them for final submittal, sometimes maybe a 2-day, 3-day submittal, because we have to get them to the Building Standards Commission so they can prepare the binders for the commissioners, and it's a very short time frame. So if we could get the comments even just sent to us directly before they're posted so that we could start addressing them and then they can be posted, that would help us out with our timeline, because we have sometimes 8 codes at a time that we're submitting for, and giving those packages to the Building Standards Commission all at the same time is a lot for them, and it's a lot for us as well. Another comment that she wanted to say, and this is more in regards to the Code Advisory Committee meetings when the public commenters are presenting their concerns or their questions. HCD would like to see some consistency in time provided for public commenters. In the past, commenters present at the meetings appear to get unlimited time to present their concerns, while commenters on their phone were cut off after 5 minutes for the sake of time. And it caused some issue for us specifically because we had a lot of the callers who were calling in to present information on our behalf. They didn't have the opportunity to do so. We also understand that a lot of people are commenting on items not on the agenda or that is being proposed. Instead of that falling on the agency to say we cannot address that because it's not on the agenda, she just says that she would like to see the commission, go ahead and mediate that on our behalf, just so that we could have an even amount of time for both public commenters here present and on the phone. That's all I have so far.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the only speaker card I have. Is there anybody else? If not, I'd like to go to the phones.
You have 0 questions remaining.
Okay, so at this point, we've finished item 3, going on to agenda item 4. I'd like to say we only have about 15 minutes left.
This,
Executive Director.
yeah, and this 4 won't take long. There's only
I know.
2 docs.
Okay.
So
I'm not going to read the whole because this wasn't the summary.
I think that
but
one works very well.
That
Mia.
one doesn't work. I got to go to the other one. Okay, it was Calvo's comment, not Calvo's comment.
Raymer?
I'm sorry, CBIA's comment.
Oh, I did have a speaker card from Andrew, but I saw him
Yeah, he
have
had
to
to
leave,
toodle.
so, okay.
I'll summarize it real quick. I want to make sure that there's, everyone understands that there's a separate admin reg for the cost of impact analysis for each item. And so you got to be careful of that. And we'll be working with the state agencies during the training for that. And then to give a little bit more authority to the Building Standards Commission for the possibility of kicking back packages if they don't have that. So technically, we're supposed to do that. We're going to be reviewing those a little bit closer. And then, of course, we always struggle with the timeline. That was one of his comments too. And then he does touch on the standard format regarding code change submittals, but I'm sensitive to the conversation about some state agencies have to group items because of the topic, and then other agencies, we can go one through, chapter 16, that type of a thing. So I think we can make a workaround. We have made a workaround that in the past. I think the clarity within the both of the documents is going to be the kicker here for everybody to help them understand how to do it. So. All right.
Thanks, Mia.
The next item. Yeah.
In either case, that's the bird's eye view of whether we should do it by topic or by section. But either case, the method or the way it's presented, though, it has to be consistent on how the agency's presented. I think. Do you agree with that? Does everybody agree with that?
I think when we get to the next document, what I tried to do is set it up so that we have this topic. So whatever the topic is, say it's COs. I think me and I were talking about it the other day, and we had a topic-specific item. How do we show it? Well, you show the major item, the main item that's going to change. Say it's in Chapter 2 definition. So that's the first thing you show. And then following that section, and you'll see it in the document, it says related or associated items. And then you list what those items are by their section number, or if it's other definitions, by their definition heading. But you don't show all the text there. You show what is related. And we could even have it where that item number shows up on page 34 of your 150-page package. So you could tie it together so that you know this item is going to be addressed in these other locations for the other associated items. Now, that may not group them all together. You can see them on one page to see Chapter 9 and 2 and 1 and what happened to them all. But it would follow the format we're looking to try to incorporate, and it might still be close enough to the grouped items to allow people to understand what's included in this code change. So we'll work with Fire Marshal. In the past, when they did provide these types of items, as we got to the end of the cycle and we're into codification, they would help us reassemble the document into a descending order again so that we could get it easier with the publisher, and didn't make BSC staff have to do that. But that's after the rulemaking, so it doesn't help the people reviewing the rulemaking during the cycle. So if we can do something that's a hybrid that helps with that, but it still allows us to keep a format, that's what we're looking for. And this may not be the answer, but this is a start, and then we'll be working with everybody, the agencies included, to make sure that what we provide meets everybody's needs if we can. So we like the idea, but we just have to work with them on it.
Okay. Did you want to go through the document?
Yeah, let's do that real quick. So the first document you're going to see is the initial express terms. Big issue here
does everyone have it with them?
Sorry.
Okay.
Got it? It's under tab 4.
Thanks, Mike. Sorry about that.
And it's a sample, and we've set up a legend that we think is sufficient for almost every condition. What we'd like to say, and we'll mention this to the agencies in training, is if there is something that you feel needs to be modified in this legend, we would like for you to contact us and talk to us about it, so we can make sure that if that's something that is needed, then we'll be fine and we can work with you on it. But not to just come up with your own legend, because we're gonna kick it back to have them change it if they do. And I think if we can minimize what goes into the document and avoid putting a lot of existing language moving forward, that takes away some of the need for these alternate legend items. We can stick with the base of what we have. So as you go in, we have the general introductory paragraph, the legend, and then the statement of the initial express terms. And just so everybody understands, this is a sampling of a part of the accessibility package from the last cycle. So it's just some elements to show how they might relate, not a real rulemaking document. It was just pieces put together to show for this example. So if you change over after you read through the charging statements under the initial express terms section on page 1, you go to page 2, and that's where the regulations begin under proposed repeals, adoptions, and new amendments. And then we're going to ask that everybody use the same item numbering, item 1, item 2, item 3. That's the simplest way to do it. I don't want 11B.1.2 or 1101.2. I just item 1, item 2, item 3. If we can stick with that, that'll simplify it. In this case, we have a Division 2 scoping requirement for adult changing facilities. This is all new language. It was underlined and it was shown in this fashion in the regulation. Associated to that is right below, associated sections to item number 1. And we even put a little paragraph in there, a sentence that explains what that means. And then item 2, chapter 2, section 202 definitions is the other item that's associated to this, as well as 11B, chapter 8, division 8, changing rooms, spaces, and elements, and then item 3, figure 11B 813, which is the clearance around the adult changing table. So you can see these are the items associated, just says what they are. It doesn't show the language or the text or the graphics. Those come later. And so then following that is the notation of reference and authority, which is required in our process, following each proposed code change. So if you look at this just as it is right here on this page, the change is really easy to see. It's the underlined language. The associated items are easy to see. They're right here. If you want to know what they are, you go to the next item 2, and there's the definition that was recommended as an associated item. Now, understanding this is a super simplified version, it happens to fall very next items number 2. It may not always be that way, but if it's item 10, it says item 10, and you can go to item 10, there it is, there's the information for that particular code change. So that's how we're approaching it in this case, and you can see the converse. So when you get to item 2, you see the associated items below. They tie back to item 1, which was the first item in that group. So they're all tied together as you go through the package. And that should keep them all grouped. If the person wants to see what they are, they can do it by that particular process. So that's how we started it. And then to kind of show how it carries through, the fourth page shows the graphics for the changing table, the associated change for that, and then again, what are the other items that are affected by it. When you go to the eyesore, that's set up in almost the same fashion. So it's done by item number, item 1, here's the change for the particular item, and then it gives the rationale. The associated items, they're listed just like they are in the ET, but the rationale doesn't show up here because it doesn't show up until you get to that particular item for code change. So each item has its own focus, and then you know what's affected by it, but you're not going to have to try to review all that at the same time unless you go to those sections separately. So that's the simplest fashion we can come up with. Yeah, go ahead.
Quick question. Let's say at some point item 3 was repealed by the agency. How does that show up in the eyesore?
Item 3 would end up being a reserved section, so we can keep our item numbering, so we don't have a renumbering of the rest of the items. So if that were, say, withdrawn by an agency, they would state that in the document that this item was withdrawn for whatever reason, CAC recommendation, or they just needed to remove it. So that would say withdrawn, and then in the associated item section, it would be withdrawn. It would just say item 3 withdrawn. And any other questions?
Come on, Ben.
Question from Greg?
That's Greg Anderson, State Fire Marshal's Office. One thing I did want to point out, if we're going to a numerical order, we will have a lot of items. Look at the tall wood building that's being proposed right now through our work groups. That will be all over the book, and it's almost at the point where each code section will have its own item number, just so you know.
Well,
and I don't know if we can group them with the commission.
Right. Well, with Greg, like in that case, let's say you're talking about that particular item. Say item 1 is a CLT, something
Definition.
with CLT. So it could be everything within that chapter that's CLT. So say it's chapter 4 and there's a bunch of provisions in chapter 4. That item 1 could be all those items that are in chapter 4. But if there's something in another chapter, that's where we don't want you to then jump to chapter 10 in item number 1, and then jump to chapter 12, and then jump to 15, and then back to, that's the idea. So if there are 10 items within a chapter, that can be an item. And then you had the associated items below that.
Can we group everything in the same chapter, even though there's other proposals that may be in between? Look at chapter 7, which is all over, or chapter 10, which is egress. So everything for egress is under one item, but we have other things that are coming in between numerical in chapter 10.
Okay.
I mean, that's the thing. But if it's in true numerical order, it's by number in order. And
I think, again, unless I'm misunderstanding, what we're trying to do is we're trying to keep you moving through the code from the beginning to the end. So if you have 15, 20 items in chapter 10, that you could have that all together in an item.
So it would only be splitted numerical by chapter,
That's-
not numerical by the code sections.
Right.
Well, that's a little easier.
Yeah, so you might have, so you may have 15 items for an entire code book because you have 10 changes in chapter 1 and 20 in chapter 2, and, you know, and those all show up like that, and they're associated to each other. I'm just giving you you know, an argument or a potential situation with that.
Crystal Sajeski, CAL FIRE Office of State Fire Marshal. So if we follow that logic, in our work groups, Chapter 10 could potentially have I3, L occupancy, tall wood, and other topics
Right.
within that same chapter.
Well, I would ask you this. Would you be preparing your initial express terms for submittal on the form to use for your workshop? In other words, you're going to build that document and then try to use it in your workshop, or are you going to work with your constituents in the workshop to develop the language and then put it together into a document to submit? So, because if that's the case, you can have it whatever form you want when you do your workshop. You can do them focused on topics only and topic and get it all figured out, but then when you go to put it into the ET, you organize it starting in chapter 1 and you go down from there. So,
So it could potentially look like, just for an example, 1015, and the ISOR would read, this is from the I3 committee. 1016, this is from the L occupancy committee.
yeah, I think that
So,
sounds like
I
that.
mean, in terms of an item, that would all be under one item.
Currently, but the way it's proposed, it would be different items.
Maybe different items.
It would be so.
But again, I don't want our itemizing process and our ET to direct what you do with your workshop. You can develop the language in whatever, or the elements, whatever way you want. You don't have to present it to your work group in our format. But when we get it, we need the consistency for the public process. That's what we're kind of
So
getting at.
each code section is gonna have its own item number.
In your workshop?
No, in our submittal to, if we go by this,
Well, in the matrix,
format.
it will in the matrix, but we do that. You guys don't have to figure out the item number.
Using item numbers and then
Right.
item numbers. So
Right.
you could say chapter 10 is one huge item and mixture of your L and your tall and your all that. Would sub out the action table, and that allows them to bifurcate the package.
Well, we could do that, but for clarity, we've always broken apart the items on topic for the commission for the discussion at the table. Otherwise, we'd only have the numbers, but each item will be a mixed bag of all the topics we're working on. So, and you're correct. We're going to do it in the work groups on the topic, put all our regs together, and then bring it together. It's just creating more work between the time of the work groups to,
I understand.
and so.
So, and we're going with comments we've received that the package was really hard to understand and follow because it jumped around and it was difficult to understand what the changes were. And so that's the only reason we're going here, is because if we start saying, hey, do it by topic and not by chapter designation, then it gets confusing to the general public. You may have specialty people who understand that, but if you got a JQ public guy looking at it, he's trying to figure out who this agency is and what they're doing. It really is almost impossible for them to figure out what's going on.
And I'm going to go ahead and ask this question. What are those specific to the state fire marshal regulation packages? Because we have a lot of state agencies that submit regulations.
Well, I don't think it is specific to you, although I don't know that too many of the other agencies group them in that way.
This is true.
DSA has, like, they'll do all their EV.
Mm-hmm.
That got kind of complex, like all the EV stuff was here. I think what Mike was kind of trying to show, and this is what we can sit down and have.
Yeah, we'll work it out.
Trying to show, you may present that topic in chapter 2 or chapter 10 or wherever it is, and you can still list all those other related items. It's just, let's keep them all in the other. Sorry.
It will just make it interesting at the commission hearings when we're looking at item 1, 7, 12, 37, 19, you know,
Right.
to a list.
Are you guys getting the picture here of the complexity of both ways of doing it? Okay, all right.
So we'll,
Okay, I think
we're sensitive to that, Greg, and we realize that it's not an easy process. So.
You would if it was 10 different topics under one item number.
True.
It would confuse me.
Let me, we're coming up on time, but
Yeah.
Every problem has a solution which is simple, obvious, and wrong. I'm going to propose one of those. This is much more complex than any of us even imagined, but I think I'm not a technophobe, but I'm also not a big devotee of technology, but I think there's a technological solution here. When you look for emails, you can sort them by date, you can sort them by topic, you can sort them by who sent them. But each one, you know, every code section is a unique address, so that the numbering system, even though there'll be hundreds of them, but every code section should have the item number should be the code section.
That's kind of the way we set up the matrix table.
Yeah. But what I'm saying is, I think I'm advocating really just reorganizing the columns, not changing what's in them. The other thing is you can't submit anything if it's not sortable. Because if it's not sortable, it's not accessible. But if you can sort it, you can reorganize it. You can organize it by topic. You can organize it by agency. You can organize it by section number. You can reprint. You can kind of slice and dice this stuff and print it out any way you want. I think the technology allows us to have it any way we want. So I'm kind of jumping to that conclusion. The other thing is looking at this from my point of view, the point of view of the user, and I think a lot of the comments were from, like, Armin's a fire protection engineer, Kerwin's a code consultant, you know, Raymer's an owner's rep. You know, basically looking at users. Users are looking at some difference jumping back and forth between topics and subjects. Subjects being code sections. You know, but basically what you want to do is to find a code section, look at what it says, which is the real requirement in precise language. Then, if you're looking at a change, you want to know why you're proposing to change it, which is a statement of reasons, initial and final, or the intent. And then, last but not least, but which is also the problem we're dealing with, is I don't care who wrote it or who had responsibility for writing it. In terms of if this says make what used to be green in the code last year blue, I don't care whether that's an HCD or a DSA or a state fire marshal requirement. If I deal with that section number, I just want to know what it's going to make me do. I'll go back to the agency later, and the agencies can't escape that responsibility because they're delegated it by statute, so that, you know, they have to care where they're messing around. But I think even Raj and I were talking about this, is I think even the regulators know, kind of, if you're dealing with HCD regulations, you know where you're going to find them. If you do schools, you're going to look in DSA's requirements. If you're doing hospitals, you're going to look in OSHPD and that kind of thing. So that I'm deliberately trying to oversimplify it, but I think that if we're crafty about how we number things, we can make it possible to express things in ways for different people who want different requirements. And I don't know how that translates to submitting it to the commission about how we review things, because you're going to end up with jumping around, and I don't know what the answer to that is. But if we think about how we identify the pieces, we can reorganize them the way we need them.
It's Greg Anderson, State Fire Marshal's Office. When you put it in the matrix, you have a column for the code section.
Yeah,
we do. We do it by item. So the agency's item number is the main item topic. So item 1, let's say, and then above it we put in the information. So in fact, it's the last item. The old table is in your book. It's this last one.
Right.
So and so what we do is we use the item number. For example, this is DSA's, and they did their 11B thing. So their item is 11B.17. That's their item number. So that's the item that ties to the ET and the ISOR for the user. And then we have our tracking number for BSC, so you guys can take them individually as action items if you need it. And then it shows what the section number is, and then the other information is what it is.
And I believe there is a way with the code section to change that matrix to list it in numerical order.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I'm just talking kind of about the thing. I thought I had this all neatly worked out, and then your example kind of blew me out of the water because it's got like 4 or 5 code sections in it. Because my first thought is this would be numbered 11B 249-1. And all the subsections, or you'd make it whether it's chapter 2, whether the lead item is the definition or the scoping or the technical requirements, which is the way 11B is organized. You just pick one of those as the organizing element, and then everything else sorts itself out. So you basically, the item, because looking at this, at the thing, if I'm a user, or even on the Code Advisory Committee, or even on the Commission, 11B.17 means nothing to me. If I know the code a little bit, 11B 608.2.1, I know that's kind of in the technical requirements for something that's related. I can't remember what it is. It's probably toilet rooms. But, so I kind of, it's 11B 208.2.1-1. And like I say, I'm oversimplifying things, but I think there may be a germ of an idea in there because your argument about organizing things by topic makes a great deal of sense, and it's in essence what ICC does. But the problem is at ICC you end up with a structural committee hearing things about guardrails because ICC just dumped it in that pot. So that's not perfect either. But it seems like I think we've got. But I think one of the key things is I think that we were talked earlier at the introduction is that there are some things which are not sortable. I think those you can't turn it in that way. The other thing is I think however we organize it, and at some point, if everyone's a little peeved about what we decide, you're in just the right place, is that the agencies are going to have to turn things in the same form.
Right. That's kind of where we're going.
And it's going to be imperfect for somebody.
Right.
Or less perfect for others than it is for different agencies. But I think we got to find a middle ground because for the commission particularly, but even for the code action or the advisory committees who are subdivided by topic, they're confused.
Right.
The other is, the other point, and I think we put this to bed, but I think we got to kill off the existing provisions. I think if you're not monkeying with it, don't print it.
I think I mentioned to you before that when BSC looks at that as staff, it means something to us because it's an element we need to be aware of if it's an existing amendment that's being further amended or it's a brand new amendment and how we process it and what we do with it. But to the public, it's an amendment. Whether it's a brand new amendment or it's an existing amendment being modified, it's still an amendment. Amendment's an amendment. So I think eliminating that will take some of the confusion out because then there won't be this existing condition, people saying, well, this is existing, what is it doing?
And if we get that what's published as existing and then the item number right, then it starts to address moved sections, which Chapter 10 is notorious for moving things around. But then the only strikeout and underline is the section number.
Right. Yep. No, I agree.
One quick thing, Mike, you did not want to go that route as far as item number. You wanted a 1, 2, 3, 4.
Well,
so
for
do you want?
right.
Yeah.
We're talking about different things.
Right.
I mean,
I hear what he's saying.
We're not in alignment.
Right.
But
So if I may, I just want to check the phones for item 4,
phone.
just to make sure. Yeah, in case someone's waiting.
You have one question remaining.
Welcome.
Hi there.
Hi, introduce yourself.
Hello, this is Ali Fatah. Sorry, I missed pushing 1-0 at the last increment, but I like the way this is headed in that it's true that in the ICC process there's a unique code change number by groupings, and maybe different code committees review various parts of the groupings, which is very similar to what we have through the CAC process where certain topics are being heard by different CACs. However, the other twist is the proposers of the code changes are different agencies. And sometimes some agencies may be proposing changes on the same code section number. So there's a need to either put them in sequentially, differentiate them, however you come up with it. And another comment is a lot of the state agencies have prior to cycle activities with work groups, and sometimes they produce a report. I don't think it's necessary to repeat everything in the report and the code changes. Maybe all you have to do is just refer to those reports. So meaning there's a comment about complex calculations for something, that could have been resolved prior to the rulemaking cycle in the working group stage, and then you can just link to that. Or you can link to maybe the existing requirements. At least it's all put in the same place using technology, as I heard earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you, Ali.
You have 0 questions remaining.
Okay. So if I might, there's one other item that's on the agenda, item 5, delivery methods. I know we spoke a lot about the website already. Is there anything else you want to add? Or we think we're
No,
good?
I think that's, we have some work to do, and we're looking to work with the agencies to, meet everybody's needs if we can.
Okay.
Just that picture of comparing pages, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to go on to agenda item 6. Is there any related items that are not on the agenda? Seeing none. Item 7 is sort of important, the action items, next steps. So this was meant to be a discussion. There was no preconceived recommendations that the committee had met and talked about. It was really just to be free-flowing, so I appreciate everyone's efforts in making this a productive session.
And on that note, we did record this, and we'll be reviewing the discussion topics. And then we did do a quick list on a whiteboard of just some of the highlighted items that people suggested, and we'll take those to our process as well.
Okay.
I guess the only thing I would say is that any of these things we think we can test drive at the intermediate process, that we should roll out as much as we can when we have a limited number of changes as opposed to the deluge every 3 years.
I agree.
And I expect you'll get good comments back from the agencies. Are you going to plan maybe as an executive director's report next time or whenever with the commission, or how would you like to move forward, Mia?
Question.
I think due to the timing of it, this isn't bad. No better. Sorry.
Now we all know what they feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I think due to the timing, what we'd like to do is come up with a few scenarios and try those out in the intervening like you suggested, because the state agencies are going to have to be developing their rulemakings between now and October. October is our next commission meeting, right?
Yeah.
And we may or may not have a meeting in October because we don't have a lot of items on the agenda. So it may be our next opportunity to meet is December. That said, I can certainly, I can't do that.
We don't want you to break any laws.
Well, we're going to have to figure out a way between now and then to inform the commission of where we're going. But again, it's a trial run because as Mike pointed out, our California Administrative Code in Chapter 1 lays out all of the phases and lays out all the documents that are required. So we can't really change that at this time, but we can work out what is inside those express terms and those ISERs to make them more clear. That's fine. And I think the state agencies will be happy we can play with that this cycle. So it may be that what we do is provide you those documents at the December meeting and talk about it, and then we'll see what we can do moving forward from there. But I'm thinking really long term is I'm hearing this idea about how it's almost like you throw it all in a database and you let it sort it for you and dump it out at the different phases. And so, I know that's kind of how ICCs works right now. It's just we obviously don't have that technology yet, but I think moving forward in the future, we can look into how do we dump all this into a database. I want to know about Section 413.1, and it spews it out. Or I want to know everything that HCD is doing in Part 2.5. It spews it out for you.
And I think it really goes even beyond the code adoption processes. Once the codes are printed and everything's out, a lot of people use that for training, and it's nice to be able to go back and see what the intent was, to be able to kind of put our message out there. That's really what we want to do, is to have everyone understand the code and be able to follow it.
So you use the ISOR language that was put in there. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
So I appreciate that.
Okay. Very good. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate all the comments. Is there anything else before we adjourn? Thank you, everyone, so much. All right. Meeting adjourned.